Hello, welcome to the new session. And in the previous session, we actually created the API for getting the list of transactions. And if we look at our requirements, it is stated that we need to be able to filter the transactions based on based on the selected date or or month. So what we'll be doing in this particular session is basically learn how to actually implement filter using GoRM, how to make our filter dynamic and how to actually be able to filter using different column or different attributes on our transaction table. So to start with, what I have done is I have actually created a filters folder inside the API folder. And inside the filters folder, I've created a transaction filter. Now, based on what is available for us, we can actually pick the query from an HTTP request using the query attributes like so. So that means any parameter that is passed through our query in our URL will actually be picked based on this definition that we have actually defined, and I've added some little validation on them. Um, so we have the from date, we have the end date, we have the category ID, we have the wallet ID, we have the type, that is the type of the transaction, and we have the month of transaction. So the first thing I need to do aside after creating the um, transaction filter is to go back to the transaction handler itself. Transaction handler. And this is where we'll be making use of the filter because that is where we are actually listing out the transaction. So just like we've been doing when we actually bind a request, when you want to perform a post request in our data, we will basically be doing the same thing with our listing of transactions. So the only difference is the method that we'll be calling for this will be quite different. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to add here and paste. So for this now, what we need to include, what we need to call now is the filters dot transaction filter, like so. And we'll call this, let's call this filter. We need to actually make sure the queries passed is binded to this transaction filter that we've actually created. So to do that, all we need to do is if error, and we need to use the c dot bind, or sorry. So what we need to do here is we just need to do error and a pointer to the echo framework dot default binder dot bind. So you can see we have bind path params, we have bind query params, which is what we actually need. Then we pass in the filter that we actually want to bind. This is expecting the context and the filter, sorry. Now, all we need to do is check if there is any error, and all we need to do now is return, let's say return common dot send bad request. Or for now, let's just return the error. Let's just return the error. So now that we've actually binded on the transaction filter, the next thing I want to do now is I actually want to check if the binding is working correctly. So I'm going to do logger dot printf and I'm going to call this filter. Then I'm going to come back here and refresh our application. Then I'm going to click on some filters or some query params and send. Now, if we look at our terminal, we can see that the filter is being printed to the terminal. We have the front date, we have the end date, we have the wallet ID, we have the category ID, and we have the month. Now, I want you to notice something. You can see the category ID, because we did not pass it any value, it is actually showing as 0, right? And the wallet ID is coming up as 4, right? So that means our parameter has actually been binded. Okay, now that we know that our filter is actually being binded, then and the correct parameters are being binded to it, the next thing we need to do is we actually need to call a method to actually apply all of those filter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say filter dot apply filters, and for this I'm just going to pass the DB instance, right? So I'm just going to pass the DB instance right there. The next thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a method inside this or that is associated to the transaction filter. And for this method, it is going to be empty for now. We need to actually create some methods before we do that. So the first method I will be creating is basically a method to filter the transaction by wallet ID. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to call it filter by wallet ID. Now you can see that I am using small letter, and that is because I don't want this particular method to be used outside of outside of the transaction filter struct, or outside of this particular package, I mean. So now, how do we filter by the wallet ID? All we need to do is we need to check, number one, if the filter dot wallet ID is equals to 0. So if it is equals to 0, then that means the wallet ID passed is invalid. So I'm just going to return. So this, I'm going to be calling this query, and you will know why very soon. I'm going to call this query as well. So I will return the query. Otherwise, so this should be of type query actually, or go rm query instance. Otherwise, we want to actually query by wallet ID, where wallet ID is equals to the past wallet ID. Now to apply the filter, all we just need to do is call the method and call the filter by wallet ID and pass the query. Now that we've actually done that, all we need to do now is we need to come back here and actually get the query that was actually returned by this particular method. And we'll now be passing that query into our as an instance. That's what we'll be using as an instance. So probably what we can do is we can move our transaction service upward and say transaction service.db, and we'll be using the query for our filtering like this. Or yeah, let's do it like that for now. Let's see how that turns out. So this is returning an error. So yeah, this should return the query. And this will be equals to query equals to this, because this is actually returning a query, as I said earlier. So this will also return the go RMDB. So let's go back to this. So now we are passing, so because we've applied this query, we are now passing it into the method that we are using to actually retrieve our list of um our list of that we are using to initialize our pagination, and we are also passing it into the the method that we are using to actually retrieve the list of transaction. On another thought, I think it is better that we actually initialize our transaction service right after applying all the filters so that the transaction service can have access to the we have an access to the queries that we've actually applied. So yes, so let's test this out, right? So let's refresh our application and come right here and apply the wallet ID filter. I'm expecting us to get a nil because we don't have a wallet ID of 4 that belongs to currently authenticated user. So you can see it is null. It is the items returned is none. If I remove the wallet ID and hit the API again, you can see we are getting data. Now, if I apply the correct wallet ID and send the wallet ID, so if you look at this now, all the transaction we'll be getting will be the type of wallet ID of 6, 6, 6, and 6. If I impute 7, which I believe we have, and apply, you can see that the wallet ID now is 7. So all the transactions that has been performed against this wallet is being returned. So we are just going to take it further by implementing more filters, right? So let's go back to our filter. We've implemented for wallet ID. Let's implement for category ID. So let's say filter by category ID. This will be dot category ID, and this will be category ID. Because if we check our transactions column again, you will see that we have that category ID and we have that wallet ID. So I'm not just manufacturing it. Category ID equals to category ID. Then you just call the method again, category ID, you pass in the query, then you return as well. So what other one do we have? We have type and we have month. So I'm just going to implement for type and month as well. Filter by type, and this will be type, and this will be filter.type. Now recall that for strings, it will be equals to empty string. So if it is equals to empty string, let me say type is equals to empty string, right? Then we don't want to filter by, then we apply our where clause as usual and return it. So we've done for type. What else? We need for month as well. Filter by month, and this will be month, and this will be dot month. So if we check our month, what type of is this of type integer? So we have to check if this is equals to 0. So this will be month. Then we don't want to apply it. So let's just call those methods, filter by month, filter by type, right? Let me be sure that we got those columns correct. So we have type, we have month. So that's correct then. So now we need to test this out. So let's come back to our Postman. And now let's filter. Let me remove the wallet ID. Let me remove the month. And let me remove slot and date. So I want to filter only transactions that are of type expense. And you can see that, okay, this is not working. This is type of income. Okay. Okay. So let's see why that is not working. So let's first of all check our query parameter. So we are getting expense. And let me check this out. Expense type, where type. Are we filtering by type? Yes, correct. I'm not sure why this is. Okay, we need to actually refresh our application. Sorry. Now let's call this again. Yeah, so we can see now the type is of type expense, and if we impute income, we get transactions that are of type income as well, as you can all see. So let's try for months. Let's say we want transactions that has been performed in months of 4. That is maybe April. So you can see month 4, month 4. So let me impute maybe a month that is invalid. Let's say 13. So you can see we have no item. And if I impute 12, we should get some transactions. So as you can see, we have some transactions. If I include a month of 1, we should get some transactions as well. So as you can see, we could also go ahead to implement a filter for year as well. So let's just do that once and for all. So let me say year, and it should be an unsigned integer to be year, omit empty number minimum. So we can just remove minimum. We can just add, let's say, minimum of 90, right? Although these validations, we are not really applying it. So we can just ignore it. So I'm just going to copy this and say filter by year. And this will be year, and this will be f dot year, right? And this will be dot year, correct? So if we come back here and let's impute year, let's say 2023, and we need to actually refresh our application as usual. Now hit the API year 2023. I'm not sure that's working. Let's see the code that was generated. So where month ID is 1 and transact. So we can see that year is not being applied yet. 2023. So let's see why that is happening. Okay, we've not actually called the year filter by year. Yeah. So we need to refresh the application, then hit the API. So we can see we don't have any transaction in 2023. But if I put 2024 and remove the months, yeah, so we can see we are getting. So that's basically it. We can also do for category ID, and let's say 1, for example. Let's see if we have any data. We don't have any data. Let me remove it and see which category we have. We have 15. So let me impute 15. Yeah, so we can see that the number of total transactions that we have also reduced. So if I use maybe like 14 or 12, let's see. Okay, we don't have. Let me see another category ID that we have. Um, we have 15. This category ID is no. Category ID is no here. We could probably state that if for category ID, for example, we could state that there is category ID. If it is 0, then we can decide that we are only let's ignore it. So yeah. So the next thing I want us to implement now is the filter by date, which is a bit much more tricky. So I'm just going to call this filter by dates, and I'm going to create that method right here. Now, for the filter by dates, it is a bit tricky, unlike these other ones that are quite straightforward, right? So the first thing we need to do is we need to actually initialize um, a start date, var start date, and it will be of time, and var end date, and it will be of time. Okay, now that we've initialized a default start date and end date, so what I'm going to do is our start date is going to have a default value of, let's say, now dot start beginning of month, and this is actually coming from this particular package right here, Genzo dot now, and this will also be equals to end of month. So that will be our default start and end date. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this like this and like this. So if start date, so let me say if end date, or if our filter dot start, what did we call it? From date, okay. From date is equals to empty, or this, or any of them, or and sorry, let me use and. So if both of them are empty, then we want to set the query to use the initialize the current beginning of month and the current ending of month. So all we need to do is we just need to state that f dot from date is equals to start date, and f from end date formatted to the end date. Then we need to state that query dot where date. Remember that we have a date column on our transactions table. A date column. Let me see date. You can see we have that on our transactions table. Let me hide this. So a date where between, that is between the start date and the end date, like so. It is that simple. But I'm going to put this in capital letter and this also in capital letter. So, and we are basically going to return the query like that. Return the query. So with this now, if a user does not supply any start and end dates, we will always return the transactions from the beginning of the month and the transactions at the end of the month. So if we refresh our application now, and hit the API, so you can see that the total number of rows has reduced. And if you look at the date, this is 2025, which is basically the beginning of the current month. And if we go downward, we see that we are still in 2025, 2025-01, based on the date that we've actually created these transactions. Yeah. So now, if that is not the case, right? Else, right? So that means either if one of these is not empty, right? They are not empty string, then that means one of them has actually been supplied to us to actually use to filter for the user. Okay, now that we have been able to set our default start and end date, and we are certain that it is working the way it should, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an extra method for validating the start and from date when they are actually supplied. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another method, and I'm going to call it validate dates. Now, the validate method, or let me just call it validate, right? Let me just call it validate. Now, the validate method is, I'm going to, let me, so the first thing we need to do is we need to check if the filter dot from date is not equals to an empty string, and the end date is not equals to an empty string. So that means one of them is actually supplied. So what we are doing is we are checking, check if either date is supplied. Now, if either date is supplied, we want to ensure that both are actually provided. And the way to do that is if filter dot from date is equals to empty string, or end date is equals to empty string, this particular method will be returning an error. So if that is the case, we want to return errors dot new and state that both from dates and end dates are required, right? Now, if all of that is fine, that is, there is no problem, then the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that the correct date format is actually passed. So if comma error, so what we are doing is we want to make sure that the correct date format time dot date only, that is this particular format right here, is actually passed, right? So if that is, we are validating the from date now that it is of the correct date format. If error is not nil, we want to return an error, say invalid from dates, and expected format is year, month, and day. Or let me just say 200662, which is year, month, and day. Then we need to do the same thing for end dates, right? Then we say that invalid end dates, correct? Expected format is like so. Now, if all of this is fine, the next thing we want to make sure is that the end date is greater than the from date. So we are going to say if f dot so I'm just going to say so let me do something. Don't let me do this. I want to actually get the past dates, right? So I'm just going to do a little refactoring. Let me call this past dates. Oh, okay. Let's leave it like so. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say var past starts date, or let me say past from dates is of type time, and past end date. So I'm just going to say set this value as this value and set this value as this value, right? Unused variable, we are going to use it. So if all is well, we want to make sure that the past from date is actually after, or is after the correct. So let's look at after repose whether the time is T is after U. So the from date should be before past end date, right? So from date must be before end date. So if all is well, then that means we are good. We don't need to do anything here. So all we need to just do here now is we just need to return nil, right? I'm not sure why this is still unused variable. Okay, it's expecting us to use it inside this code block. So what I'm going to do is let me just remove it. I'm going to have to do that refactoring. So I'm just going to move this right here and say if this okay, I'm just going to move all of this out and move right there. Then we are going to check if the error is not nil. Then I'm going to do the same thing for past end date. Move it out here and like so. Then we are able to use it now. So without any issue. Then I'm going to remove these two guys. Now, if everything is fine, then that means let me just call it validate dates. So if everything is fine, then that means the past date is actually okay. So so let's go back to our transaction handler, and I'm going to say if filter, let me just say validate dates error. Filter dot validate. Okay, this has to be in capital letter. Validate dates. Yeah. So validate dates. It doesn't need a query unlike the others. Doesn't need a query. Validate dates. If error is nil, is not nil, we want to return the error. So I'm just going to return common dot send bad request the error dot error. The C context like so. Okay. Yeah. So we are good in terms of dates like so. So now we need to go back to our filter, our transaction filter. So that means the validation has actually occurred. I'm believing that the validation is occurred. The right parameter has been, the parameter passed has been validated. So this is just me assuming it's probably not safe, right? So, but one thing we can probably do is we can come back to this validate method and just get all of those guys. So for now, I'm just going to ignore the, so if there is any error, let me just get the error. If there's any error, I'm just going to return the query. If there's any error here as well, I'm going to return the query. So that's what I'm going to do. So with this now, all we just need to do here now is pass this as this start date and pass this as the end date, right? So unused variable start date, but we are using it. Okay. So, okay, that's fine. So let's just copy this and come right here. And this will now be the past. We don't even need to format this. Or does it? Let's format it. So that will be the past from dates and the past end dates, right? So we are fine in that regard now. So let's try to test this out. I'm just going to apply the filter, then I need to refresh refresh our application. Now let's hit the API. Now we can see we are applying the filter now. Okay, we are not even calling the filter dates method yet. So filter by dates. Okay, we are calling it filter dates. This should be filter by dates. Let me correct that method name so that we can just follow the convention we've been following all the while. So yeah, so let's look at the date. We have the date, which is 2024-04-15, and this is 24-01-30. So let's see the highest date we've got, 2024-04-22. So let's try to use a date that does not exist, 2023, 2023, and let's send the API. Okay, I'm not sure that's working yet. Let's refresh our application and call the API again. So I'm not sure that's working yet. Are we applying any other filter? No. So let me look at our query category. We are not applying the filter just yet. So that probably means something is wrong with our query, right? So let's investigate. Let's see if there is any error popping up here, or let's even go to the apply filters and try to print the starts and end dates that we are actually getting here. So let's say fmt dot printf. Let's say start date and end date. So this will be f dot from date, and let's display this and date. So this should be printf. This should also be, sorry, it should also be printf. Printf. Yeah, so this will be end dates. Now let's refresh the application and run. So let's see what we are getting. Let's hit the API, come back here, see if we are getting our start and end date. No, we are not. So we need to go back to the transaction handler and try to actually print out fmt dot print line, and let me say filter, and I'm going to refresh the application. Let's hit the API again. So we can see we are getting 2023-04-01, but we are not getting a particular value. 2023-04-01. So we are getting this, but we are not getting our to date. So you can see that. So let me just quickly do something. Let's go to our applied filters and get to our filter by date, transaction filter. So this is end date. Okay. So this should be end date actually. But I'm wondering why the error is not actually being thrown. I'm wondering why the error is not being thrown, because we are supplying the start date, but we are not supplying the end date. And the error is not being reported, which is what we are actually doing with our handler right here. We are expected to get the error. So let me see what is happening. So let's start from here. fmt dot print line. Let me say f dot from date and fm dot end date. Yeah. So let me refresh the application again, rerun. and let's hit the API. So we can see we are getting our from dates, which is 2023 0401, just to be certain. From dates, and this will be end date, right? So we are saying if from date is not equals to empty string and end date is not equals to empty string. So in this case, end date is actually equals to empty string, and that's why we are not getting any error response. So okay, this should actually be an or. Sorry, this should be an or. Sorry. So let's refresh the application and rerun. Now I'm expecting us to get the error. So you can see now both from date and end date is required. So we need to update this and hit the API again. So you can see now from date must be greater than, must be before the end date. So our end date is 0430. From date must be before. So from date, okay. So we actually need to change that. I guess I'm wrong. This should be after. After, right? So let's refresh, rerun the application, then hit the API again. So we can see we are not getting any data because there is no data between this month and this month. So if we increase it to 2024, and apply, so we can see now we are getting data. So we are getting 2024, 22. So let me try to get 22, and let me see from dates 20 to 22. Let's see how many data we get. Currently what we have is number 15. So let's see how many. So we are getting 0, which is kind of strange. Let me increase this to 23. So we are getting data now. So that's the problem of between. Between does not take into account of the current date. So you have to increment it to 23. So that's the issue. So now we've ascertained that our filters are working. A user is able to filter by wallet ID, by type, by year, by category ID. So I'm just going to leave it to you to implement filter in all other places around the application and try to actually try to explore, try to implement a filter for filtering category, try to implement a filter for filtering transaction by name, and so on and so forth. So I guess maybe for the road, I can just implement another filter, maybe to filter by description or and title, right? So let me just say query filter by description, and by title. I'm just going to create these methods. So for this we'll be checking if this is actually, let me add this as well. So this ones will be string, and I need to update this man right here. Let me say title. So I'm just going to remove the validate methods since we are not using them. Okay, now that I have actually, so I have removed the validation methods, the validation tags, since we are not actually using them. So I'm going to go ahead and implement the description. So I've already added title. Let me add for description as well. Description. So this will be title and this will be description, right? And this will be string and this will also be a string. Yeah. So all we need to do now is just check that it is not an empty string like we've been doing right here. Oh, sorry. I'm just going to paste that into here. I'm going to paste that into here too. So this will be title and this will be, sorry, this will be description and this will be title, right? So for title, that will be title like um mm, how do we implement like? So in order to implement, all we just need to do, we are like equals to, we just need to construct this. Yeah. So we are like where the title is like this, and we need to do the same thing for description, and this will be description, right? Uh, okay. Now let's hit the API. Let's refresh our application and try to filter by like title. So let me see, I'm looking for rice filter. I'm not getting anything. So let me see, I thought I have a rice. So this is rice. Okay, no rice. That's inside the description. So I'm just going to put description and I'm going to put rice. Yeah, so we can see I'm getting. So let me see a title that actually has value. Let me remove all of this and hit the API and remove the description. So I'm looking for a title. So let's say transfer. Yeah, perfect. So let me say transfer. It's the API. So we can see we are getting all the titles that have transfer in them. If we apply rice, it will be empty because there is no transactions that has title as transfer and that includes title as transfer and description as rice in them. So yeah, now that we are getting what we need, and that will be the end of this session. I hope it has been quite intriguing and I hope you've actually enjoyed it. In the next session, we are getting to a later stage of our application. So in the next session, what I will be touching on is how to actually set custom error. So imagine us having a central place to actually undo all the error that we are returning in the application. And that will actually reduce the amount of if error that we are doing right here. So rather than doing this, imagine us just returning the error, and in our central error point, we have a way to actually check if the error is of this type and we return it. So which will actually make our life much easier rather than doing a lot of if statements. So see you in the next session and au revoir.